Today, we yet again have the pleasure of being together with Patrick Farenga, also known as Pat Farenga, who has been so deep into the whole homeschooling, unschooling movement for, I cannot even count the years, Patrick. How many years is it?
Well, 1981, so 42 years.
42 years. Yeah. First of all, thank
Thank
you
you for that.
for all the dedication. And I know that your work and the work on the Growing Without Schooling magazine have meant for many families. Recently, we had a guest on our podcast who actually mentioned that they got sent the Growing Without Schooling to Australia.
Okay, it's nice to see you.
I
Welcome.
was going to
It's
say
nice to have you
we've done
back.
interviews so often we can dismiss with the formalities, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could call it a formality, but it's also the personal. It's really nice to see you, and it's really nice to be able to say we'll soon be on the same continent.
Right, I know.
And I look forward to having this conversation with you
Thank
today.
you, me too.
And also that we had this little intro talk before we hit record, where we can talk about today something other than attachment and teenagers. We might touch upon attachment and teenagers, but
Political
the
climate.
intro will be, we can talk about what's going on in the States at the moment.
Sure. Well, as I had mentioned to you earlier, when was this? September 28th and 29th. There was a conference at Harvard University, this emerging schools model, moving from alternatives to mainstream. And so after 42 years now, they're saying, oh, homeschooling and the thing, and largely a lot of things that happened during the pandemic, phrases that didn't exist, like micro schools and learning pods. These were the things that they were discussing, as well as charter schools. Let's see. I'm just looking through, the different people there, and then businesses that, there were some very large businesses that fund charter schools nationwide, and some of them were interesting. There was a virtual schools, and AI made it, there was a panel on AI, which was interesting, but overall, it was. I'm still, as I mentioned to you, I'm still trying to collect all my thoughts about this, because it was really on the one hand very encouraging to see that there was all this energy, and some of it is grassroots. I mean, like I said, there's some very large businesses operating behind the scenes, propping up some of these smaller businesses and micro schools, but basically, it was like either homeschoolers who found like teachers to work with them as either a homeschooling co-op or what they call a micro school, where they would like put like maybe as many as 10 or 20 kids in someone's home with two teachers. And so it becomes like a small school for a couple of hours, and then the parents pick up the kids. And some of them got even more elaborate, where like they would have morning classes and then afternoon nature walks. That was actually, I think, more of a charter school situation. But it was interesting to me.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the charter school. What does that
mean? Let me explain that.
Micro school makes sort of intuitive sense.
Yeah.
Very small.
Yeah. See, what's political about this is in the United States, we have separation of church and state, and we have public funding for public schools, but private schools are privately funded. They don't receive any public funding. And so for years, people who've been pushing for school choice created this concept called the charter school movement. And this has been around now, I guess maybe 15 or 20 years now. Charter schools exist in a lot of states. And basically, they receive a charter from the state that allows them to operate a school that receives state funding. And the idea behind the charters was to show that they can experiment and do different things than what the public schools were doing. And they would act as laboratories for innovation and show us all these wonderful new ways. And by and large, in my opinion, most charter schools turned out to just be prep schools, schools that are modeled after the elite private college preparatory schools, and that really it was a lot of their goals, was to get students into college, and as is the goal of most public schools. But what was interesting is some of these charters, but largely the micro schools and the hybrid homeschools, as some of them were calling themselves at this conference. That wasn't like one charter school had a theme of entrepreneurship. So they would have their students, regardless of their age, create a business. They'd show them how to run the business, how to market the business, and then they would be graded or evaluated on how successful they were at making their business come true. You know, and that sounds like a lovely plan. You know, I mean, for kids who want, and I know that you know, all three of my daughters got involved in their own like business. I think every kid does at some point in their home, right? You know, so I mean that made sense. But then, you know, the more I thought about it, is that all there is? You know, is it entrepreneurship for 12 years for these kids? You know, so I mean, you know, unanswered questions there. But I'm grateful that at least some people were thinking a little outside the box, but they were using themes. And then and then there, you know, and then another thing, so charter schools are an attempt to try and make education more meaningful and relevant to students' lives. And again, it's been a mixed bag.
But the difference between a charter school and a private school is that the charter school can experiment, but it has public funding.
Correct.
And
Correct.
a private school can experiment and have
It can do whatever
whatever
it wants.
curriculum it wants, and it will still be accepted as a school.
Yeah.
Whatever curriculum, really?
Well, most private schools are become prep schools, you know.
Okay,
you know,
so obviously
yeah.
it will be
Yeah, I
accepted
mean,
by
but
the mainstream.
that law is what, you know, what is always allowed alternative schools, you know. And this was one of the things that came up at the event. I was talking with Ken Danford, who runs talk about teenagers, the Liberated Learners Network. Are you familiar with that? There are a bunch of Ken started a school, I think 23 years ago. Not a school, a learning center. See, this is another thing in America. If you call something a school, it has legal implications and regulatory implications. But if you're running a learning center, you're free. It's
You
like
can
running
do whatever you want. Okay.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want. So yeah, so Ken did. It's called North Star, Self-Directed Learning for Teens. Started it 23 years ago. It was one of the first. My colleague Susanna Sheffer, who edited Growing Without Schooling magazine for the 16 years, she was one of the teachers there, facilitators, I guess you would call them, and it was a wonderful place that spawned some not imitators. What am I say? Just spawned other colleagues to create their own learning centers. And so I think there are now 8 of them, and and each one has a different name. Like there's the Princeton Learning Co-op, I think it's called, and that's in Princeton, New Jersey, and they're all around, yeah, pretty much the Northeast, in here, and they focus on giving teens a spot to hang out. Like they don't have to go to classes if they're enrolled. They could just sit in the common area. They could do stuff, arts and crafts. They could organize events. But then there are daily like events, you know, like you can work with Susanna on writing. You can do math with Ken or somebody else. They have other teachers, you know, who come in and out. So, you know, that's the gray area, you know, that alternative schools, like, you know, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near me, there's actually a brick building that says the Graham Parks Alternative School written right there. It's like they're bragging that they're an alternative school. But as I learned at this conference, as I was sitting with Ken and some other people who are involved in the you know, these sorts of learning centers. Lori Walker of the Villages out in Portland, Oregon. She's been running one for many years herself. And one of the things that came up was alternative schools. The history of alternative schools in America got started as part of the civil rights movement to help you know bring minorities up to par, as you know, because they felt that, you know, standardized tests and the standardized curriculum were all not appropriate for kids and families that are suffering from poverty and all these other issues, and put them on the same, taking the same SAT test where they give questions about, par 3 golf courses and owning and mortgages, to kids who've never been to a golf course, or families who've never, don't stand a chance of owning a mortgage.
No.
So
Yeah.
so the alternative school movement got started that way and was popular, and that's what John Holt was writing about in the late 60s and was part of. But he saw that that was changing, and what we learned from this event, the emerging school models, is that so now school choice, and it was the conservative right wing that was promoting conventional schools, saying standardized tests are the way to go, and eventually they whittled down the alternative school movement till it was practically non-existent. As you know, it's just a few little handfuls of groups like Arrow and other groups that are trying to hang on there and support it. But now politically it's weird, because all the language of school choice is now on the right wing. Saying that, we need school choice to get the kids out of these woke indoctrinations of, presentations of history and all this other stuff. And so now the school choice movement has gone from supporting alternatives for underrepresented families and trying to find other ways of helping them, to now it's being run, well, not run. It's just the language is being used to promote these schools. And like I said, some of them do seem like they're trying to do something different, like the entrepreneurship one and stuff like that. But by and large, they're not, they're not like alternative schools in the sense of giving children freedom. And they're not, and the ability to direct their education as much. One of the big takeaways for me from this event was that so many of the people were talking about learning outside the box. We have to think outside the box. But no one wanted to change the box.
No. Yeah. I also think when you call it an alternative school, it's still a school.
Yeah. And that's my second point, is like, I've always been saying we need alternatives to school, not alternative schools.
Yes.
The other places for children to be. And this, the models that they were presenting here, are one step in that direction, but they're hardly, revolutionary, other than, the way that they affect the funding mechanism and can help small groups. But it still struck me as like everyone was going into their little pods, and like this idea of, because in America, we're, and most democracies, we're a pluralist country, and that was one of the reasons why, they felt that compulsory education was needed after this, during the Industrial Revolution. They said, what do we do with the kids if we have all these adults who no longer have their agrarian, or lives, or mercantile lives? Now, now they got to work in factories 9 to 5, or in those days it was like 9 to 9,
Yeah.
And and so school, compulsory schooling is kind of like an unjust and quick fix, based on the model of the mechanistic model that schools are factories of learning. You just run the kids through the factory.
And also at the time, probably was the better option for the children. It was better for the state to intervene and say, no, the kids can't be in the factories. They have to be in the schools.
Because they were, absolutely.
Because they were in the factories. And
they're in the coal mines. They were
yeah, even worse. The problem, one of the main problems we have now is everything has changed. I have, she calls herself my grandmother, but she's actually my granddad's sister. She came when my granddad died at the funeral and said, I know your granddad wasn't a very present granddad in your life. I would like to volunteer to take his place now that he's dead. Can I be your grandparent? And she's just amazing.
He's fantastic.
She really is. And she'll be 100 years in March. Next March.
Wow.
When you talk to her, she has perspective. And she has this amazing memory. She remembers everything. Everything.
Wow.
It's amazing. Everything is clear to her. So she can really, really show perspective on what happened the last, she remembers the last 95 years or more. She remembers, you know, she remembers getting running water inside the homes. She remembers when moving was by foot and horses.
She
Right.
remembers the silence also.
She remembers silence and stars.
Yeah.
She remembers both of the big wars. It's just all of it. And well, she was born after the first one of them, but just in the aftermath of it. So it was all, anyway. So when you talk to her, it's clear that so much have changed.
Yeah.
The childhood of someone being born today, or someone today in school age, let's say 12 in the middle of the chaos, it's just so much different from this aunt I have who was born in 1924.
Yeah.
But the school is the same.
Yeah.
The school she was in and the school kids are in today. Well, there's the iPad maybe they have, but it's not.
I was going to say kids have iPhones, yeah.
Well, yeah, but this basic structure, who gets to decide and who stands in front of the class, and the curriculum and the sitting down and the age segregation and the test at the end of the year and the ranking of the children and the whole machine is the same machine, which is, when you think about it, really weird.
Yeah.
Even workspaces for adults have changed a lot over that century. But the schools, well, maybe they're not allowed to hit the children anymore. Basically, so they can
public schools, private schools in America, you can. And actually, I take that back. I think 16 states allow paddling, using a wooden paddle on a student. Still in the 21st century.
Yeah, but you know, they're violent over there.
They
are.
No,
but every time I talk to an American who tells me I chose not to spank my child, I'm like,
it's illegal in Denmark.
Like what?
Yeah.
I mean, it's illegal to spank children. Don't hit people.
Well, yeah, see, in America, rather than pass a law like that, which makes perfect sense to me, it's illegal to hit somebody, especially someone taller and younger than you, right? And instead, it's like, no, that's my parental right.
No.
Right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, in this crazy spot, this is one of those crazy spots where, like, same thing with guns. The vast majority of Americans want guns regulated, and more people are coming to homeschooling because they don't want their kids to get shot in schools, here in America. But just try and put any sort of constraint on a gun, and you'll be accused.
The whole thing explodes. Yeah. Okay, let's not be too judgmental. What I'm just saying is, I mean, I'm sometimes I'm a little hard on the Americans. I really am surprised that could even be a thing you consider when in the 21st century.
Oh yeah, they want to ban homeschooling
or not. I mean, of course not hit your child.
They're talking about doing background checks. So John Oliver, I don't know if he's a British comedian that's on American TV here a lot. He just it's on my Facebook page. I put the clip up there in the Growing Without Schooling page, where he had a whole episode about homeschooling, and noted how children are abused among homeschoolers, and that we need to have a law that bans homeschooling, or at least does background checks on homeschooling parents before they can homeschool. And it's just like, well, why do we have to do that? Why not just have a law that says it's illegal to beat up a child?
Everyone.
Why not just give the children the rights that they're going to get when they're 18? Why can you beat someone up until they're 18 without penalty?
And
really weird.
Besides, people shouldn't hit each other at all. Then it's as a parent not the best way to help your child to understand how to solve issues. If you have a problem with a friend, you solve it by talking, not by hitting. It goes for small kids, it goes for grown-ups. Pat, I am what you said earlier made me think about a thing when you say alternatives to school. I am now not the 41 years down the game of working with unschooling, only around +10. I have no doubt that learning by curiosity and learning when you're ready, and all these things that the unschooling philosophy have shown me is, I believe, the best way to learn. When I look back at my own adult life, this is what I see have happened, and I still see can happen. I go down, oh, this is interesting, and I just work on it, understand it, learn a lot of stuff, and I have a lot of fun with it. So I believe this is the correct, one of the best way to learn something is actually what is happening on unschooling families. But then I can sometimes think, but would it, it's a really big shift that would need to happen in society if just say 50% of everybody started doing it, because there's so many parents who have grown up with this idea that you need to have 2 full-time jobs and you need to be a productive member of society to have some self-esteem and self-worth. So I'm a little in doubt if I'm like sitting and thinking, but can it work if everybody were unschooling? I cannot phantom the society right now. I know it sounds maybe a little weird, but I'm like, it's a big step. It's the right thing for the children, but it would take a lot of work for the parents out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's why I think that, you know, unschooling is changing things incrementally. You know, I mean, and I think that's just probably the best way. No one, you know, I mean, revolutions cause more revolutions. You know, so, you know, one of the interesting things that came up was the one of the co-chairs of this event at Harvard, Paul Peterson, said that, as you know, because I've been hearing the number of homeschoolers go as high as like 12 million during the COVID thing. That's because people were just defining, calling themselves homeschoolers, you know.
Yeah.
But he said, you know, Dr. Peterson said at this event that homeschoolers now represent about 6% of the population, about 3 million students. So that's an increase because, you know, John, and again, this gets to the point that you were bringing up, Jesper, which is John Holt never thought that more than 2% of Americans would homeschool their kids because we're not a very child-friendly society. And he recognized that, you know, that you know, it's just going to take time, and people just got to get used to this idea. They have to see examples of it, you know. So I think he'd be pretty amazed that, you know, it's up to 6%, you know, according to this gentleman. And even if it, you know, even if it is, that doesn't mean they're all unschoolers by any stretch of the imagination. No. You know, I mean, you know, the class, you know, one of the most popular, I don't know if it was the most popular, but certainly for as long as I've been involved in homeschooling, there's always been the classical curriculum people, you know, yes. Which is fine. I think the classics are great. It's good to know about Odysseus and Iliad and the Odyssey and all that stuff, ancient Rome. Absolutely, you know, but you want to make that your complete curriculum for your children day in, day out for 12 years. That's your business. And they do it, you know, and so they're part of that, you know, 6 million too. And I think they're probably a larger part than the unschooling part, you know, because people tend to teach the way they were taught. I mean, it really, you know, it's just like we tend to parent the way we were parented. You know, that's why these terrible things just keep going on generation to generation in some families. But, you know, if like yourselves, myself, you know, you question it and you just kind of take a step back. So what else could I do with my kids? You know, then that's how it changes. You know, like for instance, you know, the guy running one of the AI schools, he had you know, he was bragging about how they could use artificial intelligence to work with any child's interests. So no matter what your kid is interested in, we're going to help them learn. So the example he gave is 2-factor math equations. You know, he says, so if your kid is interested in Star Trek, the AI will use Star Trek examples to teach them 2-factor equations. And you know, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, well, that's great. Yeah, if the child wants to learn 2-factor equations at that moment, but basically, it's like this instrumentalist idea. that, these are all ploys, to get you to
How
do
can we
what we want.
gamify our curriculum? How can we push our agenda? That's
Yeah.
basically it. Yeah.
I mean, if a child is, learning how to use a checkbook, that's a great way to learn, two-factor equations, credits and debits, and figure stuff out that way. I mean, there's many ways. And then, of course, playing board games, but that takes patience and it takes observation, say, oh, yeah, that's what, yeah, my kid knows how to do math. We can play, board games or poker or card games, and they could calculate, the score and the pot for the money and whatnot. So, there's a lot of ways. And that was another thing that I think, was of interest to me at this event, because the homeschoolers on the panels, there were a few homeschoolers on the panels. One was a single mom from Detroit who was running a homeschool co-op. She was very interesting. And, and the question came from the audience and from like the organizers more than once during the 2 days. How do you know your child is learning? And the homeschoolers, by and large, said, because they're happy with what they're doing. I could see that they want to go to this class. They want to do these things. They're joyful. And then I can just see the administrator, oh, joyful. How do you measure joy? Where's the metric? You can't put that down on paper. And sure enough, when the data crunchers for the charter schools, they wanted to show, how well the schools are doing and stuff. When they were pressed, well, why must we use, conventional school rubrics for unconventional learning? He said, it's because it's easy. It's the easiest thing for us.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there, maybe easy for you, but what about for the kids?
Yeah, it's their childhood.
They're getting the short end of the stick here,
Yeah.
Because again, going back in the early 80s, there was this homeschooling, unschooling family in Northern California, the Colfaxes. And they pretty much used 4-H, which is an agrarian sort of club for kids, and their son Grant raised dairy goats on their farm, and the dairy goats all died, and Grant figured out what happened, and he wrote articles about it. He worked with the 4-H people. And this took a few years. And long story short, Grant is now a medical researcher for the federal government. He got accepted into Harvard. And it was so unusual back then that I think I mentioned the story once before. One of the like the equivalent of the Daily Mirror, called the National Enquirer here in America, when Grant got accepted to Harvard, they ran the headline, "Goat Boy Gets into Harvard."
But it's interesting, though, how the shift between the childhood education that happens, let's say, before they are 15. It's a little different in the different countries where the line is. We have a shift at around 15 in Denmark, where schooling is mandatory before that. And then you have something equivalent to high school, which will prepare you for your real education, like your profession.
Right.
But that's not mandatory. So our shift goes there. And letting go and being unschooler until at least that shift for all the mandatory years, and let the kids do whatever they want, is something that we have now done with 2 of our children. And I find it very interesting how now they come to this age where you would normally do a structured preparation for university, and they actually want to do it now.
Yeah, the brains are hungry on a different level.
Brains, and they want structure. They've obviously been studying all the years in their many different ways, absorbing, but also structured, sitting down to learn something if they wanted to. But we touched upon math before, and I just, right now we're observing something very interesting, that one of them never did an organized math course, never did a workbook, always sometimes, would dip a toe, but not really anything. But as you say, play board games, play Minecraft, have conversations, ask about the tax system or the discount in the shop, or I don't know,
Every day.
whatever we talk about, like,
Mhm.
yeah, you know how it goes. But no structure, no formalities, and no math teacher. None of us are
And
experts.
nothing enforced at all.
And nothing enforced. And now he is studying a course under, so Cambridge has a preparation course for something the equivalent of high school. It's really high level. Their A level is above the standards that we're used to from our country. He's just doing it. All the wasted time from 5-year-old to 15-year-old. I mean, all of the preparation, all the workbooks, all the rehearsals of the multiplications, all of the equations that they had to calculate, all of the homework would have been wasted time. He's just, I mean, seriously, from day one, he has the book, he has the workbook, which is both online, and he just starts. I'm not even helping him.
Yeah.
No,
He's doing it.
And we're talking 4 to 6 hours a day, and he's having fun.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah,
comes
he
out
wasn't taught
totally
to hate it in the first place.
Yeah.
You
But
know?
the thing is, the preparation, those first 10 years is just waste of time.
That's
Because
right.
the moment that they are ready, it seems like it's just an excuse to hold the children there sitting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's another issue that you know, we here in the state in America have never come to grips with, which is childcare. People go broke paying for childcare here. You know, it's really hard for single parents who have to work and stuff, even for two-income families who have to work. It's really expensive because of all the rules and regulations and all this stuff. But you know, why don't we view childcare as part of the education process? You know, John Holt wrote in the first version of Teach Your Own, and I've kept it all. It's in the current edition as well. It says schools of education should get their students to go to families who have newborns and help them so that they understand, one, how children learn, and two, what it entails to raise a child. I mean, they're only going to be there on a part-time basis helping the mom a couple hours a day. So, but even that would be more eye-opening than yet another lecture about what a 6-year-old needs to learn in first grade.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
also you asked before, Jesper, how would it work if, let's say, half of the population decided to unschool or even just homeschool, which would mean that half of the population, half of the families with school children, which is not half of the population, would probably have to decide to have one parent stay at home. That's like the reason you say it probably wouldn't work, but that's just not the entire truth. That there are so many ways that we could change our idea about what work life looks like. It doesn't have to be 8 to 4 or 5 days a week. The same 5 days a week, by the way, for both parents, so that we make sure everyone has weekend at the same time, so the lines will be really long in the supermarket Sunday afternoon. We could distribute the working hours throughout the entire week, throughout the 24 hours of the day. We could work less. We could consume less.
Right.
That, I mean, most of us could easily consume less. We could live more humble. We could own less cars, and we could drive them less. It seems like these derivates of a society where people work less and therefore consume less, and therefore burn less of the resources of the planet would be a good thing. Yeah. On many levels.
Absolutely.
It's part of another solution, not just about the childhood, but about, you know, the problems that we are facing.
One of the things I was pondering is, if I look back at my own many years of fatherhood now, I remember how it was going to work. And I'm very grateful for the situation we have now, where I can work from home and I don't need to work a lot, because we have succeeded on many levels of our dreams. But the level, one of the things I remember is sometimes sitting at work, and Cecilia sent me wonderful pictures of what she and the children were doing. And I became envious. Honestly, I actually remember sitting at work and thinking, why is that not my life?
Right.
I want to be free as well.
Another question that I've had for many years, for even maybe longer than, no, well, I became a mom quite young, but at least for as long as I've been a mom, which is half of my life, I've been thinking, why is it I cannot have a professional, interesting academic career working 3 days a week?
Mhm.
This is impossible. Yes, I can decide to do part-time, but then I will be the underdog.
Mhm.
It will never be fun. There is no way that I can use my
Or you need to be an entrepreneur and be
great brain in a work situation.
not in a workplace, no.
Well, I could if I created my own, but the way we have structured career life, it's either, you give 145% or you give up.
Mhm.
So it's not for humans. It's not for humans who wants to use their brain or whatever, well, it is brain in the end, but whatever talent that they have to contribute with on this planet, but also go home and take the time to talk about nothing with their kids, and maybe go for a run and slow cook or whatever, have some of the outside of working life and a good big chunk of it. Because could I have worked 3 days a week in a meaningful job, and you could have chosen the same, and we could have, we would have needed no help and could have unschooled from the beginning. But those jobs, you have to create them yourself.
That's right. That's right. Although, things are changing, and it's so interesting that we're in this part of the conversation, because that was one of the things I learned when I first came to Holt Associates. I grew up in an Italian and American middle class family in the Bronx, and all of a sudden, I'm at this company where John Holt is saying things like, we need to conserve water. We need to, he was very much into ecology and promoting things like the book Silent Spring, that, one of the first books about climate change and how we have to be careful with the earth, about basically about how we can be less dependent on the market and the state for our needs, and not free, just less dependent. And and that really got me, when I hired Susanna Sheffer to be the editor of Growing Without Schooling magazine, after John died. Her dad came to the office. He visited Boston to make sure that his daughter was in a good spot, and he's looking at all the books that we had, and one was about caring for your that was it. One was about childbirths, right? Doing home births. The other was teach your own, doing homeschooling, and then the other one was called caring for your own dead, about not doing expensive funerals and stuff. And so his name was Isaiah. Isaiah looked around and he says, "You know what the problem is with you guys? You never get out of the house." But there's a lot of truth to that, because we wanted to bring it back, and that was something else that that got me about the this emerging schools thing. Is like, it was all about the education market.
Yes.
And participating in the education market. And it's just like, well, I don't want my kids to think that they're going to get an education by buying stuff. You learn some things from buying things, comparison, but come on, and Illich pointed out, where do we get this whole idea of consumerism? Because we're fed little bits of information and then rewarded them through the school curriculum. We're being trained to ask for these rewards and to act for them, even back in 1981, John saw, because he mentioned this in Teach Your Own when he wrote it that year, that the population was shrinking, of school-age children. I mean, now in America, people are saying, oh, we don't want kids because we can't afford them. It's too expensive. It gets, and then apparently in South Korea, that's a real issue, and in China, people don't want kids because it's become too expensive. It's too much work. It's too difficult. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to society? But on the other hand, the opportunity for the education end of this is, well, why? We went to, and now with technology, we're even talking about doing this more, like educating the masses. Instead of educating individual people. So having smaller schools, more neighborhood relations, and thinking more of like bioregionalism and being rooted in a place instead of, I can't tell you, I was doing an interview with a podcaster from France a couple of weeks ago, and it was kind of bugging me because I saw 3 different ads for college that were running in various places I was reading. Each one had the same tagline: change the world. Come to college and change the world. Boy, wow. What about getting a job?
Yeah. Wow.
But now we go to college to change the world. It's a site like we've gotten so big with our aspirations, but so teeny with our abilities to execute them.
Yes.
We just feed people these
And
dreams.
also so narrow with our options.
Yeah.
I mean, we're walking this, well, not we personally, but lots of people walk the same path and they believe it will lead them to a good place.
Mhm.
And in the States more than in Europe, I suppose there is a big market factor to it because I mean, you have to save up for college, you have to pay for college, and many people live on campus, and that's very expensive. And there's all this,
Mhm.
it's big money,
It is.
probably.
Yeah.
I mean, and for a European, it's different, especially for a Scandinavian. It's
Yeah.
for free. You go to university for free. You're paid, actually. You get a monthly salary for studying from the state, and even student loans are state regulated. So you will not be exploited the rest of your life because of your student loans.
And
So,
it's
so
crazy
that
here in America. We can't even talk about this. People just
No.
shut you down. Oh, that's socialism. And I was like, if it is, bring it on. But
I heard, what was it? Yeah, I saw a Netflix thing with my oldest son about student loans, and it was interesting because it was clearly an American production, and we had to discuss and look up how the differences are because student loans is very different here. And I heard, I'm not very much into politics, so forgive me, I don't know who it was, but it was an American politician who called it communism to give away education for free.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's how they dismiss everything. We won't even discuss it. It's just
No,
communism.
and I'm not a big state fan on many levels, but I'm like, if you are a state, then to invest in the brain trust, to invest in the future of your country, the future inventors, by giving them the best possible education, how can that be communism and a bad thing? I'm
I
like,
know.
it's kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
I mean,
Yeah.
what's the reason for having a state if it's not about making sure the citizens are doing good?
Right.
So what we need with the
Well,
state is we need welfare. We need those who fall through the cracks to be caught by something so they don't fall all the way down and break.
right.
And we need obviously healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's very eye-opening for me to
And
travel.
that to me is
realize
that
that
thinking outside the box. It's like every time, they say the way to fix education is we need better teachers, we need better materials. It's like, what about providing the families with security? That they
yes,
know that they're not going to lose their home because one of their parents got sick and can't work, because all our healthcare is tied to work until you
yeah,
become 65, and you can
yeah,
retire.
yeah.
On Medicare, which is basically a socialist program.
Just take over.
Yeah.
Right. Which I'm very grateful for. I wouldn't,
Yeah.
that and Social Security, but yeah, we're in a very strange place, and the colleges really rule the roost about this because everyone wants to get into college, And they used to, when I was growing up, they were like, oh, no, colleges aren't about, job training. They're about making you a well-rounded individual. And, so you could do all sorts of things. Now it's all about job training. And now they're finding out, that, even computers, fields so well, Jesper, even computers, you don't need a 4-year degree. That you could probably do with a certificate, and then you need to know the latest programming language, whatever. You go take that course, get that certificate. You move on. So, but they don't want to go there because they got 4-year income streams. I mean, that's. I mean,
And it wouldn't be good for them if you could learn it in 3 months. They would
right.
lose a lot of income. And I have a personal question, because one of the things I believe that the people listening into our podcast also likes is some of the personal stories of how it have been to be unschooling. And you met John Holt, if I remember correctly, before you got children, right?
Yes.
Yes. So you had met the philosophy, you knew all about this, but I know from my story that in the start, I had a lot of doubt if this really would work. So I imagine it might have been different for you sitting and working together with John Hall, but from there to trusting the process with your own children, how was that process? Did you have a lot of fear? Did you have this normal, will they ever learn thing, or were you so well trained in the philosophy at that point?
No, I appreciated everything that John was saying, but I'm a real I gotta feel it and see it sort of person. I mean, intellectually, I get things, but if I don't feel it, it's not real yet to me. It's still just an idea. And one of the great things about working at the Holt Associates office was, one, homeschoolers would come in and volunteer, and they were always welcome to bring their children. And then as it started to grow more, John had once a month open houses. So on I think it was on Wednesdays. And then people come to the office from 7 to 9 to talk with John, to talk with any of the employees there, to look at the books on the shelves and talk about them, just to meet other homeschoolers. That's what convinced me. The more I met homeschooled parents and children, and in those days, we were like the only game in town. So it wasn't like this horrible political thing now where everyone identifies themselves, oh, I'm a Christian homeschooler, or I'm a secular homeschooler. They all just came there, and everyone, their kids there was nothing exceptional about them. That, you say, oh, I could tell you don't go to school. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was they were more comfortable with adults. Sure, there were a couple of shy ones in the crowd, but by and large, they were used to talking with adults and having adults take them seriously. They weren't constantly trying to grab attention because their parents ignore them for so long. They knew that if they asked a question, they get a response and then move on. And so I started to realize, there's something different here, and I liked it. And that's why I realized, and especially when you talk to the kids about what they're interested, they could hold their own. They weren't acting childish, which is what we kind of expect in certain ages in school situations. They were themselves. And like I said, some were shy. Absolutely, not everyone was a meet and greet backslapper sort of person, but they were real. They weren't pretending to act. They weren't acting like children. They were acting like themselves, like they were comfortable. And that's when I realized, and especially as I started to meet older homeschoolers, and then before I had children, we let parents bring their kids in to the office. So I had that experience of working single moms and dads with their children in the office. And I was looking for this photo earlier. I don't think I could put my hands on it. But on the 10th anniversary of Growing Without Schooling, which would have been 1987. We started in 77. We took a photo, we took a montage of people in the office. I was the only man there with my daughter, Lauren, who was 9 months old, dressed in her onesie on my desk. And then there were, all the other parents who had children, and then a couple of people like Susanna, who wasn't married at the time, didn't have children, but there, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, I've just been around kids in the workplace and in my life a lot longer than any of my friends ever have. And all my friends who love their children dearly and stuff, they're all looking, for that break, like they want to go to a resort where there's no kids and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, I can appreciate that, but I don't know. My daughters are all grown up. They're all in their 30s now, but I still like hearing the neighborhood kids. I still like going to the playground and watching kids play. I don't. The segregation of the ages is another thing that I think homeschooling and unschooling helps break down, and that's important for us to realize that children learn by being around us, and that really helped me. Just the example of having kids come into the office.
I am so envious because we didn't have a lot of older unschoolers and homeschoolers around us where I could see that it worked. I know we recently on another episode talked about the trusting the process, about the kids learning to read in their own speed and how I had difficulties with that. So it sounds to me like you saw it work and just trusted the process. Did you had any fears when it became that time where you were thinking now they have to learn, or you had just seen it work and was relaxed about it?
I was pretty relaxed about it. My wife came from a very conventional, education background. Her mother was a religious education teacher in Catholic schools for 20 years, and she grew up in the military. But that was actually a plus for her because she understood. She always said that she and her brother learned so much more by traveling around. Her dad was stationed in Vietnam, and so they were in Hawaii when he was there, and then in Washington State, and then in Germany for many years. He was in an army base there. And while he was working in the army, she and her mom did a lot of traveling and sightseeing, and that's what they got. So my wife was very. She became open to the idea once she got into the notion of traveling and using local things. But still she it took her a while. She was still we'll go out and go for a hike, but only after you do such and such.
Yeah.
So it was still set, but you negotiate. I mean, this is the other thing. It's just like what everyone has slightly different comfort levels with unschooling. It's great when both parents are on the same level, but it took us a while to find that equilibrium.
Well, it took us a while as well.
It took us a while as well. And what I'm hearing and just wanting to give to the people going on this journey and the people on this journey is, please share. Please show the newcomers that it actually works. Let them hang out with you and meet real children who have just lived life, because it gives this trust that you can see they grow up to be normal. It's not like we need to take in our children and use them as poster children, but somehow I think it really helps the process for the doubt you can have as a parent.
Right. Well, that's why John called it growing without schooling. He says you're going to grow and learn whether you go to school or not.
Yeah. We recently talked to Miro Siegel, who is Lady Liberty's son, and he said, well, I've become a case study and I'm okay with that when we talk to him.
Right.
But because his mom is so famous, obviously everybody's staring at him and have been for many years. And it made me think about how our comfort levels with sharing our children's story, and especially so we've always been quite open about how their process has been, and they are okay with that. Of course, we checked before, but we never put them out there. It's not our children doing this podcast.
Right.
But I've actually been thinking recently whether we should find a way to help them share their stories because I also remember, and I think this is one of the reasons it was easier for me to see the point of unschooling, because I did get to spend some time with unschooling families on a quite regular basis, and they had children that were older than our children, and I saw them, and they were not square, they were not green, they were not weird. So I'd seen it real life and realized, it's really an eye-opener to just see how it works, which is the reason, one of the most important things we can do to help those who are curious is to just be open-minded and share our stories, and maybe invite people into our homes or meetups at the park or whatever, to just lower the stress level a little bit and show how real life can happen even if you don't school. It's a big chunk of the basic structure of how we see life. It's just like if you try to imagine living without money, as if money didn't exist. It's very hard to do. And I couldn't do it. I'm not saying I could do that. I'm just saying it's as big a part of our understanding of what culture is, what life is, how everything unfolds. So trying to take that out is really going to rock the whole entire structure of, and it just helps to see children who were never in school. And talk to them for a little while.
Well, John Holt had on his biography, which I would send out to, when people wanted him to book him for speaking engagements. But this was after he founded GWS, Growing Without Schooling, in 1977. Ever since then, on his biography, it said, education was the line. And then underneath he says, I believe a person's education is as much his personal business as his religion and politics, and should not be forced to answer any questions about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we wear our educations. I mean, people like to, what's the joke around here? Oh, I went to a little college and across the river from Boston. That's code for Harvard.
Okay. We can brag about that.
The silent brags, and we get a lot of our identity from our education here, and I think in other places too. I mean, it's become a badge, but
well,
it
is formative years, and I think we should also distinguish between, there is the compulsory schooling of small children, ages, let's say 5 to 15, where it is a forced situation. The child is not allowed to leave the building, very often not allowed to leave the chair. It is a very prison-like situation, and there is a lot of structure, a lot of, I would even say, mental violence going on, and there is no freedom for the subject, for the person, the child involved. Later on in our country, it becomes voluntary after 15, and you can discuss the level of voluntary if your parents tell you to do it and you're still living at home, but at least it's not state mandatory anymore after 15. And then you have the university or college, where it should be voluntary at this point. You're a young adult, you choose your line in life, and hopefully you're studying something you find highly interesting. This is voluntary education, and maybe it is walking down the beaten path. Maybe there is not enough conscious choice involved when people go to college and university, but there could be. And I earlier said that I find it crazy to call it a communist takeover to give people free education, because I think educating the population is a very smart move from a societal point of view. And I believe very much in this level of education. I think it's a very good idea to get a university degree, whether you get a formal one or you do some Khan Academy or your own home study version. We recently found a great course of philosophy, how to study philosophy at home. Great. You don't need the university. It's a long list of YouTube explanations, and here's the read this, discuss that, and think about whatever. You can do it in many ways. It doesn't have to be formal education, but it has to be voluntary. And when you're a young adult and it's voluntary, it's a completely different ball game from forcing young, vulnerable, in many ways helpless children. They have no choice. It's scary. I mean,
and it's been that way for a long, long time. You know, I mean, it's ingrained in a lot of adults. I mean, because we were raised that way, and that's why it's so hard for us to change. It doesn't have to be. I agree.
Sorry, go on.
No, you know, I agree. It doesn't have to be that way, and that's why I'm involved in unschooling. I want to show people the
and
way.
we also, you said how you worked with all the kids in the office. This is another false premise that exists in your culture and mine. The whole Western world believes that kids can't. They are not allowed to work. If they are allowed to work legally, there's usually a limit on how many hours per week. And you cannot bring them to your work. No kids at the workplace. It would be unethical. It would be wrong. And I have heard a lot of semi or 100% racist comments on how children from the Middle East cultures that live in Europe go to work with their parents. And, you know, then they spent their entire childhood in the kiosk, and, you know, and
I just think it's the best training ever.
Best place to be. You know, mom is cooking in the back room, dad is around, granddad is actually there, your cousin is coming over, you see how the business is run, you're surrounded by people who love you, you have a lot of personal freedom.
And you get some responsibility.
And you get responsibilities as you grow. Nothing wrong with it. And we have this idea, probably dating back from when we were protecting kids from dangerous environments in early industrialism, that we cannot bring children to the workspaces, that it would be dangerous, it would be ethically wrong, and it would ruin the workforce, that we couldn't, you know, get the work done. And this segregation, I think we really have to work with removing the idea that it's wrong to bring children to it. Obviously, if you're a surgeon, you don't bring them to, you know.
And not every workplace
it's not everywhere that you could do it, but you could do it many places. And maybe even working as a doctor in a case of emergency or a rotation system, you could bring your child to work once or twice a month, and it would work somehow if we could sort of open our minds to the idea that children could be welcome everywhere in society, not just in the prison-like structure that we call school.
But we have this weird notion, and I'm pretty sure this is true in Denmark and again, you know, most industrialized countries. And that notion is called educational neglect. It's like you can go to jail for, you know, denying your children, you know, by neglecting their educations. Right. And yeah, I mean, I don't want anyone to be treated as, you know, like they shouldn't like the book Educated by Tara Westover describes her being raised in Utah by a very strict fundamentalist family. And, you know, her dad was bipolar, and her older brother was too. And so it was a very, you know, it's a very, very difficult situation. You know, but no one reported them for educational neglect, you know, or for child abuse. Although when you read the book, it's pretty scary. In fact, the grandma is always trying to get the daughter, you know, her granddaughter out of the situation, you know. So, you know, there are really difficult situations, but that to me is child abuse, not educational neglect. I mean, you can learn an example about math, like I've used this many times, but, you know, when my daughter Lauren, we didn't push math, eventually it became too much of a struggle with her. But when she wanted to learn math, she was 16, you know, and she took a course at the local community college, and in 6 months she learned, a course was called Fundamentals of Mathematics. She was there with adults and other kids who had actually graduated high school, who failed math, and they all learned the fundamentals of math in 6 months of regular classes.
Yeah.
Instead of 12 years of going, or 16 years in her case at that time, of going through. I mean, this idea that if you miss it, like, right now, because of COVID in the States, I don't know if this is true where you are, but in the States, they're all worried about all the lost learning. It's like, well, wait a minute. What does that mean? It's like, you're looking at test scores. You've been teaching to the test for all the years leading up to COVID. Then you couldn't teach to the test effectively for 2 years. Of course it's gone down. It doesn't mean they're not learning. It doesn't mean they've gotten stupider. It's just that, and we all know what happens. You pass the test and you forget what you studied afterwards, for 90% of the students, it's, if it doesn't mean anything to you. And that's why working in a kiosk and being around people who are doing work, worth doing, not nonsense. But work, I mean, really, to be I mean, this kid understands that in order to put food on the table, I need to sell X number of tamales or whatever it is by the end of the day, and that may not be I mean, it might be nicer for that child to be in school if it was a nicer spot, but there's no guarantees on that.
No, and the whole indoctrinated understanding we have that school is something that takes 10 years and almost 7 or 8 hours per day, that is normalized, and it's more or less imprinted in our mind that this is the period it takes to learn, which is really, really wild.
And it keeps expanding, Jesper, right? It used to be 6 years old till 12 or 16, I think. Now in the States, 3 years old is mandatory kindergarten.
Wow.
Yeah. And it got so bad here in the States because the education establishment just is never happy. There's always more to do. So kids were needed more learning time. So they cut out recess. They cut out playtime. I mean, Peter Gray's written, I mean, that's one of the reasons a lot of his work came to the fore, is like, what's going on here? This educational neglect idea is very, it drives a lot of the fear and pushing towards.
But what could be
in school?
I think that could be really interesting is if someone could research how long does it actually take to learn the different subjects. For example, the whole of math, as you learn in the public school, how many hours are you using on that in compulsory schooling versus took your daughter less than 6 months and not like 6 months full time at all.
Right.
So if we had those numbers, I think it would be interesting for people to look at them.
The risk, though, is that this calculation would tap into the idea that we have to learn it.
And then also the thing about, it's easier for them to use standardized tests. How do you evaluate that they've learned stuff that, you can't say, I'm going to teach you and then, see if you learned what I taught, as opposed to what we're suggesting, is like, the learning is embedded in life. So everyone's going to have different schedules. So like late reading as you know, is very common among unschoolers. But in school, if you're not reading by 3rd grade, that's a big problem.
And I just recently thought about how difficult it must be to run around with that shame imprinted in you, that you are not following your peers. If you are a late reader, or if you are late to math, or if you're late to whatever. I remember, standing in school and should say something out loud. Sometimes you should that. And I remember the anxiety I had sometimes about it and the fear of the judgment. I mean, why put that upon people? It's not fair.
I'll never forget, for me, math went completely downhill. And when I forget the exact grade, but they were trying to teach the concept of negative numbers using a number line. And that made no sense to me. Numbers don't go on a line from positive to negative. I just, I just couldn't see it,
No.
and, but other kids did, so they got it. That confused. It really wasn't until I remember it was Donna Richoux, who was the assistant editor with John Holt, who explained the number line to me when I was in my 20s. You know? And I was like, it's still, I get it now, but what a horrible way to describe stuff, you know? I mean, because it's so abstract. You know, why not use like a thermometer or something like that to show positive and negative numbers, something like that, you know?
And I know my mom, she ran around with an identity of being stupid and not knowing math because a teacher, when she was young, said to her, girls are stupid, they can't do math.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it actually affected which choices she made career-wise and a lot of things.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
mean, that person not ruined her life. She have ended up living a wonderful life in many other ways, but he just closed down so many options by determining that women are stupid and can't do math back in the 50s, you know?
Right, right. Well, you know, that's one of the things that we forget about. And I wrote about this in when I revised Teach Your Own in 2021. It's like the proper course of your education should be birth to death, not K through 12 or K to college graduation. You know, there's a lot of contributions that people make when they're older. John Holt wrote his book, Never Too Late, about learning to play the cello in his 40s. You know, I mean, and that was, and one of the reasons he wanted to do it was to prove that, you know, people say like, oh, you can only learn a language if you're young. You know, it's easier to learn when you're a young kid. It's, you know, easier to learn to play an instrument when you're a young kid. It's like there may be certain advantages of plasticity and muscle memory and stuff, but it can be learned. In fact, there's an MIT study that I forget when it came out, but I put it in the book, that showed that older people learn languages as fluently as younger people.
Yeah, I read that one too.
You know, it's like,
System,
come on,
yeah,
guys.
yeah.
You know, but this idea we have to make kids these Swiss Army knives by the time they graduate school, so they're ready for everything. You know, this well-rounded individual. It's like, what nonsense. Yeah, we're rounding ourselves every day of our lives until we die. You know, come on.
The thing is, I think it comes from the idea that statistically the early readers, or some of the early readers, and some of those who get the very abstract things very young, they have extreme high IQs, and statistically that's will become a more successful life. We know this, we can see it in the data. Doesn't mean you'll have a horrible life if you have a lower IQ. It has also a lot to do with all of the other choices we make in life. But I think when we try to push these things to young children, it's sort of a competition to make a play pretend that the child is extra intelligent, or that we can put them a little bit ahead in that game running for the good life if we push them to act as if they had this extreme IQ, which they probably don't. You might be able to teach a child to learn to read by, let's say, 6, a child that if you'd left it alone would learn to read by 8. And there would probably be no difference in the outcome in the other end, but we have this installed this weird idea, you know, the earlier the start, the better the outcome, which is wrong.
Yeah.
It's just wrong. But it's a very stubborn idea. So we want them to get up and walk a little earlier than the other kids in the street, and we want them to learn to read. Oh man, they could read when they were 4. Yes. And because we love them, because we want them to have a good life, and we want our hopes for their good life to have some anchor of some sort. So we also want them to come home from school with good grades in math when they are, let's say, 9. And the reality is it doesn't matter at all how much math they can do when they're 9 in the long run. But it's become this false idea. And the big problem with that, I find, is that it covers up something. It makes us
completely blind to something very, very important, what would they have done with those hours had we let them alone? Had we left them to do whatever they wanted, what would they have learned? Maybe they wouldn't learn to play the violin. Maybe they couldn't, do multiplication by 9. But there is no way you will ever know if you put your child in school, and maybe you do it with all the kind, loving, great, amazing way it can be done. Put them through those 10 years from 5 to 15, let's say. What would have happened if you didn't? And that's the risk you have to be willing to take as an unschooler, to just stand back and observe. What is it they are doing instead? What is it they come out with in the other end? And now we can evaluate 2, 3-ish, but 2. And I could make a nice little list, but I'm not. I'm working with the privacy thing, so I'm not going to do it today. But I think I have to talk to them first, at least, the very least. But I could come out with a list of what happened instead. And we have to be very full of trust in the process when we let go of them, and we let go of the idea of the curriculum, and just trust life, that within those 10 years, there is something else they will learn. It's out of our control. Some of it might be non-measurable. And at the very least, if you're an unschooler, it will not be measured. So you cannot show up somewhere and say they have 89% correct answers to the test, because there's no test. But this is the big secret underneath it, that it's just so hard to talk about it, because how do you even begin?
But I think one of the things you touch upon, Cecilia, is that being a human and a parent is in many levels super scary. You have this child you put into the world, and you hope that your child will have a good and happy life. But we do not have it's difficult to measure. Am I a good enough dad, for example? I don't have a list where I say where did I succeed? What was good with what I did? So if I can look at some grades and see that my child succeeded in this, and this, and this, then I can be like, oh, I have done something good. So I understand many parents' needs for an external kind of checklist, because I still sometimes find it difficult to make up that checklist of having that complete trust in the universe and in my children. It's if I have a dark day, I can be like, "Oh, have I done it good enough?" So I think that's one of the thing where the whole school thing and all these tests and stuff helps parents, because it is much easier to have an list someone externally have made, which is even saying you don't need to think about if they are happy or not, and if they are confident in their life. Just look over here, and if there's checks here, then it's good. Then you have done a good job, and you can relax inside as a parent, because it is difficult to be a parent. I find it sometimes terrifying. Yeah.
So the question is, do you trust the curriculum and the state, or do you trust the process? That's basically it. It comes down to that.
Yeah, all what I'm trying to seek out is that maybe we should relearn to look at what is important for our children. Maybe we should have more talks in life with our partner about what is it we want our children to master. And it doesn't need to be curriculum based.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think is important to note is that it's not like we're doing nothing and our kids just live in this vacuum and they discover stuff on their own. They learn to read because they enjoy reading. How do they learn to enjoy reading? Because you read to them,
Mhm.
or you're,
And because I enjoy reading, because
and
there's always a book or five at my
right.
bedside table, and
There
I
you
talk
go.
about what I read last night, and they see me get excited discussing literature with my friends.
We
Yeah.
teach ourselves that, to our children.
Mhm.
They're great observers. They're picking up on a lot of the things that we don't think they're picking up on. And so it's really important. That's another reason why it's important to have more friends, in the family, other adults and children that your children can learn from. I mean, it's not like we just put them in this little bubble, where they're protected and they're going to learn.
Yeah.
And they learn from the experience, and that experience is largely us, the adults in their lives, until they reach school age, and then as unschoolers, it's going to continue. But now we show them how to branch out. So I mean, I've heard that knock against unschooling more than once, like, oh, you do nothing with your kids.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I mean, it's so funny, on that John Oliver thing about banning homeschool, where he talked about child abuse and homeschooling. He showed this lawyer who runs the Homeschool Legal Defense Association here in America, Mike Donnelly, during an interview. And Mike Donnelly's talking about doing a science experiment where they bought a sheep's eye and they dissected it in their kitchen. And John Oliver, he goes, I mean, he makes like 3 minutes of jokes out of this. And I'm thinking to myself, that's a bad knock on Mike Donnelly. That's not fair, because God knows what sort of experiments we did in our kitchen with our kids, right? I mean, every homeschooling family, unless you have a laboratory, that kitchen is like the center.
Mm.
I remember one time I asked this teenage homeschooler, what's his favorite thing about homeschooling, and he said the refrigerator. So yeah, I mean, people got to get used to the idea that, I don't want to dissect a sheep's eye, and we never did that in our homeschool. But yeah, we did a lot of chemistry experiments in there, and certainly a lot of cooking experiments in the kitchen, and it's not unusual. So people, you are who you are, and you teach yourself to your children. And that's why it's important that we reflect on ourselves and our relationships, and try to improve them. And like you said, you go for a job, they just want to see you got a grade in such and such a course. Well, we know that employers always complain about college graduates who are slackers, who don't know enough, or that they should know better. Blah blah blah. Just test, like a good salesperson. They usually don't take a test. They're told, sell cars for 6 weeks, work with so and so, and then we'll see how you do. There could be a lot more of that, but instead, it's a lot easier, just like with standardized tests, to say, oh, you graduated from such and such a school. They don't have a good reputation for accounting, so go. We're not going to hire you. I mean, that's how a lot of decisions are made at big companies.
Yeah, I think one of the things you said earlier reminded me of what is actually one of the greatest gifts and joys of being a homeschooling parent is, indirectly, Pat, you're saying if you want to help your children grow through unschooling, you need to live an interesting life where you're passionate, and where you give yourself space and room to learn and enjoy. And as you said, go get some friends. Have a big social life with other parents who do interesting things. And it's actually true, when I look back at before we started this line of life, my life was more standardized than it is now. I have given myself a lot more freedom, and it has rekindled my own lust for learning and for enjoying, and that keeps growing. And it's just like the biggest add-on of being a homeschooling and unschooling parent, I think.
Well, you guys have taken it to a whole nother level with all the travel you do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's just, you know, that's just wonderful. And I know that you're part of the whole world schooling community, and you know, and that, you know,
It seems like for many people it's the next level, that once you realize that you don't need the school, and maybe you start to unravel the idea of what is a home. Do we really need to have each our own room? Do we really need, you know, do we need the 2 cars? Do we need the mortgage? And because homeschooling, one of the first things that happened to most people is they have to realize that it will be a 1-income family for a while. Or 1.5 or whatever. You have to face what's the most important. And I remember saying to Jesper in the beginning that I'd rather live in my car than go to work ever again. That was after I beat cancer, and I had tried to be away from my children for a while, and also faced the idea of dying from them. When I came back, I said, you know, I'm never doing it again, ever. It was kind of too bad for you, because the problem of bringing in the money landed in one place, but I just said, I'm willing to whatever. I just don't want to
Be forced to
leave again. And it was more complicated than that, because we had a great house and my grandmother was the neighbor, and you know, I can say this as if I was really brave, but it was actually quite complicated. But I think many families face this, that now you have to become very clear with your values. What is truly important? Would you rather unschool and eat rice and tomato 3 out of 5 days? Or do you want to have more expensive food? Would you rather unschool and then you can never have a fancy pair of shoes again? And I think these things, once you realize that, many unschoolers downscale the whole consumerism part. Maybe they move into a more humble living situation. Maybe they sell a car, maybe they sell both cars, maybe start walking. And in our case, we realized, how does it even make sense that Jesper has to get up every morning and leave the house with the bike and bike for 40 minutes to bring in the money, and the rest of us get to stay at home, but we have to stay at home here because it's close to the office. Whereas most of the time we would like to be somewhere else because it's a country with a lot of rain and darkness. And so we made the transition into working from home, and home suddenly could be anywhere. And I think, well, in the whole world schooling community, I see that that's what's happened to many families. Once you take the school out of the equation, the kids are not trapped anywhere. And one parent gave up the working because of looking after the kids. And then you just need to pull that last little plug out of the wall, and suddenly you have a lot of freedom. And then it doesn't make sense to stay in the same place all the time. At least you start to travel a little more. And we just took it to the the extreme. We just sold our bus, actually. So I suppose
school bus?
The big red bus. It's not a school bus, it's a tourist bus.
Well, yeah, but similar.
Yeah, we sold it. So now we're really homeless.
No, we have a wonderful van, and
we live in our car
and rent houses from time to time. We do not live.
No, I'm saying it as a joke. No, we're not homeless. We just rent the homes we need, and we have a great van. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful, you know, and you know, things are changing so much right now in terms of work. I mean, there was an article in the New York Times a couple of days ago, I think 50% occupancy rate among offices in Manhattan right now.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, you know, people really want to work from home, you know, and maybe, and if they have to, only go in the office a couple of days a week.
Yeah.
You know,
and it wouldn't be allowed if the business owners couldn't see how effective it actually is.
Right.
That's the.
It's a great thing we got from the COVID thing. Actually, it's great that finally the world woke up to the fact that people actually do work from home. You can trust people, and they like to work and get things done rather than chat around the printer.
Yeah, absolutely. Pat, it is around time. We have talked for a lot of time, and we
always great talking with you. Time flies. I have no idea what time it is. So
every time.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I would like you to tell a little about the work you do. So people, if they want to know more about the GWS and the whole thing, so if you can tell to people where they can hear more, how you can assist them, and some of the work you do. That would be a wonderful way to round up.
Well, thank you. I mean, right now I'm in the process of completely redesigning the Holt website. It's the website address is johnholtgws.com. And GWS stands for Growing Without Schooling. And John started the magazine in 1977, first publication about learning outside of school, probably in the world. And I came in 1981, and then when John passed in 1985, I continued to publish the magazine until 2001. So we have 143 issues.
Wow.
And I'm currently bringing all of them back in print and collecting them. But you can view them. One of the first things I did when I closed Holt Associates was scan every issue, and they're available for free online. You could just go to my website and look through the GWS issue archive. But the original issues, well, I won't show you, but they're really, the type is really, really small. You can't search them and so on. So all of them have become PDFs now. And I'm coming out with volume 5, which is the volume when I became publisher of the magazine. And so we're starting now, with the whole new generation of issues, and there's full of information.
Quick question, Pat. When you call them volumes, then you create them into book formats, correctly?
Correct. Yeah, I'll show you. Here's
it's just so people know.
Right, here's volume 2, and this is issues. Let's see if I can find the contents real quick. You can see how dense the text is, but I made it big. This goes from issue 20 to 30, so there are 10 issues in this one.
In a volume. Perfect.
And I'm working on volume 5 right now. Which takes us up to issue 60, and then that means I got 143. So.
You're not halfway yet.
But I to me too, it's now that I'm in an issue and I'm seeing my photos of myself with my daughter Lauren. I remember putting her in a papoose and riding the trolley to work because we had an office in downtown Boston. So we did it that way, but also books, books that we recommended and sold about unschooling, and I keep it up to date. In fact, it's funny. I got here's an unschooler from Texas. Her book "Success Without School" just across my desk a couple of weeks ago. Unschooling my children from birth to college.
Right.
So there's what the schools want, which are test scores, and then there's what is known as social proof that something works. And I view books like talking about what how your kids get into college or don't go to college and are still successful in life, how unschooling works, that's the social proof that and people, and this has been around for years. In fact, I consider 143 issues of Growing Without Schooling magazine social proof that homeschooling works. Yeah. Some people use some curriculum, some people don't use any, and others, only do it for 2 or 3 years. Others do it for, I mean, it's amazing how much is out there. And so I'm trying to get all that organized so it's easier to find on the website. Videos of conferences I've put on, and stuff like that. They're all up there. It's all available for free. I'm really trying to, I really want people to see that there's more than one way to teach and learn in our society. And teaching by example, which is pretty much what we're talking about here, is one of the surest and tried and truest ways of helping your children learn. So that's what I'm up to, and that's what I hope to continue. and
Please do.
Please do. And I mean, volume 5, and there's at least 5 more volumes.
At least, yeah.
And that is, I think it's such wonderful work you do, Pat, and I encourage people to go and purchase them. I presume there's links directly on your website, yes. And they can also be found on Amazon, I know. And it's just like it is story after story where people can read of real life examples. And that is sometimes what we need as parents who are going on this journey. So thanks a lot for that work. And thanks a lot for your time today. It has been a big pleasure.
It's a pleasure speaking with you too, as always.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesper and Cecilia.
It's been fun, like always. We'll link to your website in the show notes.
And the books.
Great.
And yeah.
Enjoy Mexico. I look forward to reading about your adventures.
Yeah, we're leaving in a few days.
That's wonderful. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, safe journeys.